Nobody's doing anything about this currently.
What is the big, scary, frightening change that you're seeing in the UK now?
What would shock most people to know about trafficking is all big tech has a part to play in this. Abuse of children being live streamed by predators.
Jesus.
That has increased since COVID 850%.
My God.
All you need now is a Wi-Fi, a payment card, and you could be literally paying to live stream abused children, and sometimes paying as little as 95p.
And now the latest development is that that's starting to be produced in the UK.
I think most people assume that all of this activity goes on the dark web. It doesn't. A gang who were convicted, they met on Instagram. What I think the biggest thing big tech could do,
why aren't they doing it?
I'm led to assume it's because it doesn't make them any money.
Everyone you know has to watch this video until the end, because Dr. Alison McClymont is about to reveal to you the most disturbing thing imaginable about the apps you use every day. If you appreciate this information, please subscribe. Your mission today is to watch it through and really think about how child abuse has become institutional. Do you use the apps Dr. McClymont names? Do your kids, nieces, nephews? How are they implicating you? And why is no one doing anything to stop this? I think you're about to find out why.
Dr. Alison McClymont, you are a trafficking expert. What is the big, scary, frightening change that you're seeing in the UK now?
I think what would probably shock most people to know about trafficking specifically in the UK, or actually globally, to be honest, is the amount of, or the increase, I should say, in online trafficking specifically of children. So what I mean by that is the fact that we are now seeing abuse of children being live streamed and directed by predators around the globe. And that's, I think the latest statistic was that has increased since COVID 850%.
Jesus.
So I think what shocks people about that is the fact that when we assume, or when we talk about specifically child trafficking or child sexual exploitation, we assume that that happens in person. So people, the classic example of somebody goes to a foreign country, maybe particularly Southeast Asia, and they go and obviously offend against children there.
Gary Glitter, that's
Exactly,
right.
Exactly. But I think, look, we can't say that the internet has created child abuse. It hasn't, but it's certainly industrialized it. So what all you need now is a Wi-Fi, a payment card, and you could be literally paying to live stream abused children. So what happens is, say somebody in, often the Philippines, but not always, but there is a child based somewhere in Southeast Asia. The predator connects with, or the word we're not allowed to say on here,
The
connects,
PDF file.
the PDF doesn't connect, or connects with somebody who is agreeing to abuse, usually their family member. They will pay via a platform, and then they can literally conduct this abuse in live stream.
And now the latest development is that that's starting to be produced in the UK.
So we think that that is the case, yes. So when we look at the amount of images that are on the internet of this type of abuse, so I think the latest from the Cyber Tip Line, which is the predominant sort of aggregator of this data, they've said that there is 60 million in circulation abuse images of children currently. Now, a large portion of those are unaccounted for from a geolocation perspective. We assume, based on the data or the images that we are seeing, that 60% of those appear to be children of Western origin. So what that suggests to us is that, unlike the kind of classic UN take on this, which is that the children are usually based in Southeast Asia, and I can go into why that generally is considered the case, based on the images that we're seeing, if 60% of them appear to be children of Western origin, it makes sense to suggest that actually the West is also now creating these images, and they're being traded. I mean, they're being traded for sometimes as much as £1,000 a file. But I think what we should also know is that the West, and particularly the UK, is an enormous purchaser of these images, particularly of live stream abuse. So what we've seen is a number of different convictions in the UK of people who have essentially directed the abuse of children. And I'm talking babies here, I'm talking toddlers, and sometimes paying as little as 95p to do this.
To get those images?
No, to agree to, so they've connected with the person who is, and as I say, is generally a family member. So it's quite often the mother, not always, but quite often. They've connected with the mother, usually via a social media app, often Instagram or Facebook Messenger. They've groomed the mother in some way to abuse her child. And then for up to 95p or for as little as 95p, they will request certain types of abuse to be done.
So they're paying 95p to, say, the mother to do that stuff, and that's insane. I mean, the closest I've seen to that in the mainstream in terms of the news was the Lost Prophets singer, Ian Watkins.
Yes, but I believe in that situation... Was money changing hands in that situation?
I actually don't think it was.
I actually don't think it was, because I think what's important to realise here is that this is an economic transaction. There was a man recently convicted in the UK who had sent £250,000 to various different people in various different countries to live direct the abuse and sometimes the torture of children. So I think this is what people aren't quite clear about what happens is... When we talk about child abuse images, we assume that what we're talking about is static pictures of a child. But actually what's happening is predators are connecting, and sometimes obviously, with each other to share these images, but they're also connecting with people who are agreeing for a price to abuse children. And so what they're doing is, if you think of, say, a Skype call or a WhatsApp call, they're setting this up, they're exchanging money, and then they are live directing this abuse.
My God, it seems crazy. I guess there's 1 in 100 or so people in the UK have that inclination, I suppose, or in the world that is 1 in 100 people. So I guess you end up with hundreds of thousands of people with that. So even if a small percentage of them, that's still millions of people around Europe, isn't it?
Of course. And I mean, we know that the websites that host some of these images, and there was recently one just closed down by Europol. And I mean, you'll be disgusted to hear what it was called, but it was actually called Kiddie Flix. And it was in the same branding as Netflix. And they were essentially offering for a subscription, you can witness the live stream abuse of children. That was created in Germany. The Netherlands is, at recent data, the largest hoster of this type of platform. Not necessarily content creating, but they certainly host the platform. But I think it's reasonable to say that we in the West are also creating these images. I mean, if you think about how much money some of these images are creating, of up to £950 per file. Yeah.
It is weird. I mean, you made that point that images are, they use the word images, don't they? Some celebrity was caught and he had files and images on his hard drive. Presumably that really means lots of videos.
It does. And I also think we need to understand, because the media whitewashes what this actually means. Because I think it's, for example, there was recently, I think, a BBC producer convicted of 6,000 images on his laptop.
Jesus.
Some of those images were what's called Category A images. That's essentially sadistic torture of toddlers or babies. I mean, I think we need to understand when we're talking about people convicted of holding images of child abuse, the severity of what we're talking about that they are accessing and also paying to access, because these things aren't free. They're behind a paywall. So people are actually paying actively to access this imagery. And if you think there's 60 million of them currently in circulation.
Images, was that?
Files in general.
Yeah. It's completely insane. Without giving away how one can find this stuff. It's a difficult question.
No, of course.
I don't want to give that instruction to people. I also want to understand how, is there anything in place? Is it as simple as if you had the website name for the Flix thing, you just type it in and you're there? Or do you need some sort of dark web thing?
So I think so there's two separate things here. I think when we're talking about live stream abuse, it's very, very important that people understand that we are talking about something that is used, that maybe we use every day. WhatsApp, Skype, general social media messaging platforms, but with a live connection. So this doesn't have to be on the dark web. I think most people assume that all of this activity goes on the dark web. It doesn't. It goes on platforms that we use on a daily basis. When we're talking about accessing hosting sites, yes, of course, some of them exist on the dark web, and actually taking them down is not the problem. So once people have allocated, so for example, once Europol or Interpol have allocated or identified where they are on the dark web, you can remove these sites. The problem is that doesn't stop people creating these images and these files and these videos in order to sell them somewhere else. This is an enormous trade that goes on globally in child abuse images.
What is the dark web? Just in a very brief, simple, it's not, is it a separate browser? What is this thing?
I mean, the dark web is a term for, yes, separate browsers that you can access via things like VPNs and what have you. I mean, it's a collect-all term, but there's certainly no suggestion that the majority of child sexual exploitation goes on the dark web. I think a lot of people assume that, but I think they don't actually recognize that. I mean, there was, I think recently, a gang who were convicted of not only directing the live stream abuse of children and babies, but actually also themselves traveling to commit these acts. And they met on Instagram.
It just makes this whole thing feel quite unstoppable. And the reason I asked about the dark web is, in my mind, it's like this. It's almost a very childish idea I have of the screen is black.
Yeah,
and
exactly. And then and you're like, oh my God, I've entered the dark web. Yeah. I mean, I think the dark web has been a sort of catch-all for all sorts of different types of, for all sorts of different types of servers and hosters. But it's what we're talking about here is it happens on, the normal web, if you like. And actually the other thing that we're seeing a large increase of is, it sounds, and again, the media whitewashes this with the way they term it, but self-generated images. Now, what that means is that people are approaching children on, say, the normal web, social media normally, and they are grooming them to create images and videos of themselves that are abusive. But I think when people hear the term self-generated in the media, it sort of suggests that there is some kind of consent to what they're doing. But again, we're talking sometimes up to category A images, or encouraging the children to abuse younger siblings, to abuse themselves, obviously, to self-harm. Again, I think in current circulation in the UK, 95% of images that are created in the UK are what's termed as self-generated.
Right.
But of course, when we look at, I think, Ireland's tip line, or hotline, I should say, recently did a report around what these types of images are and files. There's often heard in the background an adult outside the door or in the file. So these aren't self-generated. This is exactly what happened. So there is an adult saying, do this, do that.
My God.
But it is appearing self-generated. So actually the term self-generated isn't giving us the whole picture.
It's so crazy because the camera phone and the cameras has just changed everything.
Yeah.
And I mean, because I'm 37, so it would have been 25 years ago when I was 12 or something like that. I was in these chat rooms and I thought I was talking to other kids my age. Yeah. And it was only recently I suddenly thought, gosh, it probably wasn't. But luckily we didn't have all the phones, the cameras and all of that. So I never sent anything. I was probably talking to some grown men somewhere in...
I mean, very possibly. There's been a recent specifically with the platform Roblox, there's been a recent move to, I guess, identify who the users are on there and to see if you're a child or an adult. But their argument for doing so is to actually ask for the biometric data, so a face scan of the child. So you can imagine how problematic that is. So you can't keep PDFs off your platform because they're approaching children, and up to the point that actually in certain cases they have literally resulted in actual abductions of children.
Wow.
From people that they have met on Roblox. But what Roblox's answer is not to remove the chat function, it's to, can I biometrically scan the data of children? I mean, frankly, if you can't keep predators off your platform, I'm not necessarily sure I want you to be holding the facial biometric data of my children either.
Well, this is really frightening, and this is something I didn't know you just told me before,
Yes.
Cameron, what Roblox, because only people who've got kids will know what that is. So just tell me very briefly what Roblox is and why parents need to be afraid.
So Roblox, I think, is one of the most used gaming platforms of children, very, very young children as well. That and another one called Minecraft, but I'm going to specifically...
Heard of that.
Yeah. And they both have a chat function. But Roblox was designed, I guess, you can play games, but you can also talk to people. They also have a function in it called private chats, where you can essentially not speak in front of the rest of the game. Mm-hmm. So what this has created is a platform for people who can pose as children to approach children. And then what they will usually do is they will say, why don't we move this to another form of chat messaging, such as Snapchat or maybe Discord or Telegram. But we've actually seen that there have been cases of actual abductions of children as a result of this.
So they say, where's your address? We'll come and get you.
And we've certainly seen, and I don't think many people are aware of this activity, but there is a growing type of, I guess, cyber criminal who are trying to approach children online currently, and they call themselves the Com.
Oh, right.
So I'm not sure how many people are actually aware of what the Com is or how active they are, but there is certainly evidence that they are using Roblox to approach children as young as 5. The Com is essentially a group of young males predominantly. Sometimes they call themselves 764. Sometimes they have other names themselves, but the most well-known one is 764. Essentially what they are is they claim to be satanic worshippers, but I think that's a kind of red herring to what they're actually doing. They are approaching predominantly female children and asking them to harm themselves. And this isn't necessarily always for money. Sometimes it is, but it isn't always necessarily. But we've had cases, there was a case in Australia of an 11-year-old girl who was asked to carve the letters 764 into her skin. We've had lots of cases where they've approached children and asked them to obviously generate images of themselves, which are child abuse images. There was recently a case, I think, in the UK where someone was, I think the young man was 22, and he had been arrested for approaching up to 600 children and asking them to do this. So the Com as a group are, I would say, one of the most dangerous threats to children online currently.
And 764,
this
is because it's named after the first 3 digits of the zip codes of Stephenville in Texas, which is the hometown of its founder.
That is correct.
I mean, I want people watching this to write that down because no parents know about 764 or the Com.
Or the Com. And I think people aren't aware when they think that someone's going to approach their child online, they probably think it's going to be a much older man. But members of the Com are not necessarily much older. They might be older teenagers, but they're not necessarily much older. And also, because they're potentially more in that peer group that are much more tech savvy, they're using much more tech savvy approaches to approach children or to groom children.
So the stranger danger thing of like the old man in an overcoat.
Exactly.
That's probably still exists, but that's nowhere near. The main trouble right now is these sort of young internet people.
Exactly. I mean, I don't want to distract from the fact that there is still a large amount of older males and sometimes females as well. Let's not move away from that.
Is that the case, or do they tend to be sort of hypnotized by the guy? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Look, I think if we go back to the idea of live streaming abuse, which I mentioned predominantly, or the data would suggest predominantly happens in the Philippines. Now, there's a reason we think the data suggests it predominantly happens there, because there was certainly a growth of it in the Philippines, as in the Philippines was the origin country of the creation. So there was potentially a Filipino mother and child, and they were making this image and then selling it to a foreign predator. There was a large amount of investment into that part of the world and large amounts of NGOs. The UN collect a lot of data there. So when we look at the data, it skews towards, oh, this only happens in the Philippines. It doesn't. But I think what we're talking about here is the idea that there is a mother, as an example, or an older sister abusing against a child. But the people who tend to be committing the abuse to the child in the image do tend to be a woman. So I take your point around have they been groomed, but I mean ultimately they are enacting the abuse and they are doing this many, many times over for money.
I think I asked from a place of psychological curiosity about I obviously women have sex drives as men do, but it's very, and I mean I looked into this some time ago, and there does seem to be a percentage of women with the inclination towards children, far lower than men, but it is there.
Yeah,
I met one. In Germany, I met a woman like that who said, and it was hard for me to get my head around it. And I was saying to her, "Are you sure that you feel that way?" And she's like, "I would never do it, but I do have those urges." And I couldn't. Whereas a man, I would say, I believe you. You know, go and get help. With this woman, I was like, are you sure you're not just sort of neurodivergent? Or I don't know. But I don't know what I was looking for.
I know what you mean. Look, there have been enough cases of rings where there have been women involved that we know that they're not just, they're not just being coerced into this because of the man. I think there have been enough cases of that. There was a case in Scotland, I believe, where a woman was actually holding raffles to abuse children.
Christ. And you wonder to what extent it's the power, or is it this degenerate sex thing?
And look, I mean, I think that's always going to be. So if you look at the sort of trial testimony of that kind of case, there will always be someone that says, "Oh, this woman had, previously experienced domestic violence, or she was being coerced into this in some way." Maybe those things are true, but it's not exclusive of the fact that she also was then going ahead to abuse children.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key point when we're talking about female predators. Yeah, there might be reasons in their backstory that somebody could give or could position and say this is why they've done this. But it's not exclusive of the fact that they've done it in the first place.
That's a really interesting point.
And I think when we look at and people actually often ask me this, if we're talking about either male or female abusers of children, why did they do it? Is it because they've been abused themselves? Well, actually, there isn't any sort of concrete data on that, frankly. I mean, some statistics would say up to 30% of men who go on to abuse children have been sexually abused themselves. But that's not a large amount. And also, if we look at the data of children that are abused, which some people say is up to 1 in 4, well, we know that 1 in 4 people do not go on to abuse children, so that therefore doesn't follow. So it's not causation of the situation.
I see. But still 30%, that's higher than just in the general population. If 30% of them are people who've been abused, presumably that's higher. If 30% of today's predators were abused themselves, that's still much higher than I'd imagine. I don't know what percentage of just people in the general public have been abused. So it sounds like it can push them towards that.
I think it definitely can, but I don't. I think we need to be careful when we're talking about sort of correlation and causation, because those two things could be true, but it doesn't mean it's caused them to do that. I also always worry a little bit when we start going into the backstory of people who have gone on to commit horrendous crimes against children, because ultimately we still need to hold them accountable for the crimes that they've committed.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely something we can look at. And as researchers, we can think, well, this helps us to understand or maybe even potentially prevent or identify people who might be more likely to abuse children. But it doesn't mean to say that we should be saying, oh, well, this is why this has happened.
Yeah. Or for it to be as some sort of mitigating circumstance.
Exactly.
It's unfortunately, something bad happened to you. You can't now just go and do it to someone else.
Exactly.
Bloody hell! It's such a big issue, and it's so wild. Talking to you, it's the last few weeks and messaging and stuff. It's been like, wow, we have to get this out. That people need to understand this better. And then one of the things that was really it's crazy to know about is the extent to which I think you hold Meta responsible. Would you say?
I would say all big tech has a part to play in this, but we have to look at Meta specifically because they are holding some of the largest, if you like, market capital of messaging apps. So if we look at things like Instagram or we look at WhatsApp Messenger, that's under their banner. We can also look at the fact that, in recent cases where they've been asked to supply evidence around, if there was a recent one, I don't know if you ever followed it, but Ian Russell's case where his young daughter was essentially groomed by the algorithm to tragically take her own life. And Meta were named as an interested person in that inquest alongside Pinterest. But Ian Russell, the father of the child who died, actually stated that Meta were frankly very, very difficult to deal with. They were laborious in handing over reports. They were hard to deal with from a legal perspective. They certainly didn't want to take any account of this. And I think we can see that across the board in the way that when they've been approached by also law enforcement to say, what are you doing about the fact that this is on your platforms? There's certainly some pushback there. And it's important to understand that they have something called end-to-end encryption. Now, what that actually means is, from a privacy perspective, that's great. Meta can't read your messages. That's great. And there's lots of people around the world that would say, that's what we need. We should definitely not have any big tech spying on us.
Yeah.
I agree to some extent. But what that does mean is that when predators are grooming children or discussing with each other, that law enforcement also can't access these messages. And if law enforcement do ask to access these messages, they have to go through enormous, laborious loopholes to get hold of these
But it
messages.
is still possible then. That's interesting.
Yes and no. What I think would be the biggest thing big tech could do, should they wish to invest in it, would be actually...
Have you ever been at a party where everyone's deep into some book, swapping references, and you're just nodding along, hoping nobody asks you what you made of Chapter 9? I'm sure you've been there. I know I have. It's why I've been trying Incitius. It's a subscription that gives you proper summaries of serious books, history, religion, philosophy, politics, including the ones most summary services quietly skip. Each one runs about 20 minutes and you can read it or listen to it. Now, this won't read the book for you, and it isn't meant to. If you've read something and want to freshen your memory, or you just want to be able to follow the conversation, it does the job nicely. Right now, it's 75% off your first month on monthly billing. Use the code HERETICS at incitius.com/book-summaries. It's a smart subscription to have.
To create something where they could block the live stream of child abuse happening in real time. Now, frankly, if they can create AI to do all sorts of other things, and they can detect copyright music very, very quickly, you can't tell me that in their trillions of dollars that they have, that they can't do this alongside. They also haven't, frankly, done enough to say... So when law enforcement get a lot of files of suggested child abuse images, they have to go through individually to watch every single one to check what's contained in there. Now, there's no way that big tech wouldn't have the facility to get an AI to scan that, to see what's contained in there, and to hand over a more cohesive file. But currently, law enforcement are literally clicking and opening every single one.
Because Meta can't be bothered to help.
Frankly, no. And I mean, if you look at, not just Meta, but any other big tech, they're not also, donating big numbers in this space. I think currently for the cyber tip line, which is essentially, as I said, the main aggregator of these images and how we access or at least try and geolocate predators around the globe, Meta donated $1 million. $1 million. And they were the largest donator of big tech, by the way.
Wow. It's really frustrates me. It frustrates me because I think they set themselves up a little bit, and Zuckerberg is guilty of this, setting himself up as this kind of, I've done this to make the world a better place. We're making this weird virtual reality. Shut that down now. But that was to make everything a better place and so on. And then, as you say, well, you could instantly make the world a better place by setting up AI to stop the live streaming of that kind of material immediately.
I mean, I have no doubt of all of the capabilities that they have, all of the funds at their disposal and the teams that they have, that they could do a lot more in this space.
Why aren't they doing it?
Well, I mean, I'm led to assume that it's because it doesn't make them any money, but I'm also led to assume that it also would get so much pushback from privacy campaigners.
But the AI to stop live streaming, that's not affecting anyone's.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. So, I mean, I think the argument is there hasn't been the investment made. There has been, some of the big tech did actually approach the European Parliament and ask to trial essentially scanning messages for what's called CSAM material, so child sexual abuse material. But the European Parliament blocked this because of privacy concerns. But when we go back to the idea that Europe, specifically the Netherlands, is one of the largest host countries in the world, and actually I think it's 65% of websites that host this material exist in Europe, it's very disturbing that the European Parliament wanted to block that.
This is a really difficult philosophical one, the privacy issue, because
massive.
Pretty much everyone in my kind of YouTube sphere or podcast sphere, they're all very anti-privacy or anti-invasion of privacy. Everyone's very concerned, and I feel that way as well. But I very rarely hear them talk about the other side of that being, well, firstly, the child sexual abuse material, and secondly, terrorism. These are two massive issues. And I'm absolutely not saying, okay, the answer then is to just have everyone looking at each other's apps and things like that. But at least can we have that discussion? Because in this kind of YouTube-y, do you know what I mean? This political sphere, you can't even have that discussion. You're seen as like, oh yeah, you just want the government to look at your stuff. I don't want that, but I want us to have the conversation and go, but what do we do about growing terrorism and child sexual abuse material? I
mean, I think the terrorism angle is certainly one of them. But actually, if we look at, and also, by the way, the cyber tip line will create, or they also look for things on the internet that are generally unsavory. So there will also be terrorism activity on there. Or child sexual abuse is by far and away the largest amount of the data that they receive. So that is by far and away the largest problem that they're looking for on here. Now, I'm with you. I don't want people looking through my WhatsApp or what have you, but I also don't want to prevent law enforcement doing their job because I know that the fact that there's 60 million images or videos in circulation, it means that we need to do something about this.
But the thing is, they will use that then, and they'll see, the next Lucy Connolly or someone sending a private message. And there have been police turning up at doors for private messages.
Look, I do agree with you in that instance, and I'm not suggesting that this is a simple thing to solve, but what I'm suggesting is that nobody's doing anything to solve it currently, certainly not meaningfully. There's certainly no meaningful investment in trying to do that. And I think the privacy angle, look, we all live in a world where our privacy is becoming more and more important. As you say, look at the situation with Lucy Connolly. Look at the amount that, free speech is being somewhat policed. I do feel that this is sitting in a separate space, though. And I do feel that most people would agree that we do need to do something about this.
Perhaps a trigger word that stops the encryption. If they say something that implies that they're looking at that kind of material, or that's what this material is, in that case, authorities are allowed to have a look, or I don't know.
Certainly, or Or they are, if they're in a live stream, that there could be some type of AI that could detect what's going on in this live stream. Now, I don't know how they do that because I don't design AI.
Yeah.
But I'm also conscious that people that do probably could, but they're not. And I think that's the problem. Also, let's go back to Roblox. Why do you need the chat function?
Yeah.
That's an easy one. Why do you need the chat function? Just remove it.
Yeah, I was going to ask next, what can parents with kids really do? It's very frustrating. You don't want your kid to be the only one who doesn't have a particular game or platform or something.
I mean, I would certainly say remove the chat function. I think actually Roblox's CEO actually said what you need to do is monitor your children 24/7.
Oh, for God's sake.
Well, that's great, but you could also just remove the chat function.
Dr. Alison McClymont has absolutely blown my mind, but what she says soon about the grooming gangs is going to leave many of you very angry, and rightly so. So stick around until the end.
Like, you could also just remove what you think is basically making your app addictive to children, because that's really what they want.
They're not going to do that.
No, of course.
It's like asking cigarette companies in the 60s to start telling everyone about the health problems.
And I think what we need to understand about this area is, look, child abuse has been going on since the dawn of time. Child abuse images have been going on since the dawn of time. It hasn't, as I say, been created by the internet. But what we do need is some way of actually trying to police the internet, that this is being shared on an industrial scale. And people are paying money for this. There's payment trackers for this. But actually nobody's doing anything about this currently.
But some people hear that police the internet and be, oh, hang on. Do you know what I mean? It does feel like you said, child sexual abuse material needs to be a separate thing. Because we don't want people policing our internet in other respects.
I agree with you. I don't think we want people policing the internet in that respect. And actually, do you know what? In many ways, you can't police the internet. I mean, certainly some countries could probably try, but I think it's such a big behemoth of a machine that you probably can't. But I think what we're saying is platforms such as Meta have the ability to build into their platform ways to detect this, to prevent certain users on this. It shouldn't always be down to the individual user and the parent in specific cases to monitor this, because you as a platform don't want to basically build this into your technology. Or at least, collaborate with people, collaborate with law enforcement into a way that it would involve privacy, of course, but what do you actually need as law enforcement?
When I was doing an investigation in Germany into predators, they were all, the ones I was trying to meet and document, they were all on an app called Threema. Have you heard of that? Have you heard of that one?
I actually haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, I've never heard of it since. I've never heard anyone mention it.
I've never heard of it. What is it?
I just think it's another, Signal, WhatsApp.
Yeah, so it's like a Discord. It's it's a chat, Telegram.
Thing, but it's like even more encrypted than whatever. It's just there's just so much that we don't know about. Is what I'm saying, I guess.
No, I definitely agree with you. But I mean, I think what we need is the likes of big tech to actually come in. To come into the space to actually come and want to try and talk about this.
And then outside of big tech, I mean, almost the opposite, I guess. I mean, you've looked into Afghanistan and the boys. These are the Bachabazi male boys.
So as part of my research, or as part of my background, I worked for a long time in Southeast Asia looking at child sexual exploitation, and part of that work also extended to Central Asia. So I was also then working with a team in Afghanistan who had essentially set up a residential home for survivors of Bachabazi. Do you know what Bachabazi is?
Is it the dancing boys?
It is. So it's not very well known, I think, as a phenomenon, but essentially it's termed a cultural phenomenon, and I take enormous issue with that, but it is essentially termed a cultural phenomenon specific to the Pashtun community, or the Pashtun culture, I should say, which the cultural phenomenon argument is that this is an ancient cultural proceedings whereby women or girls were not easily accessible for sex due to needing to pay a dowry or needing to get married in order to have sexual relations with them. So what people would do was they would dress up very young boys to appear as girls, and they would essentially host parties where these young boys would be abused. It would also be common to see an older man with I'm talking under 12-year-old boy dressed as a girl, because of course, remember, after the boy passes puberty, then they start to appear more like a male, and he is abused as part of these parties.
And then the cultural aspect is that we're supposed to sort of just think it's okay.
So if you ask, and I don't know how many times you've had sort of ex-serving military on here, or people who've served in Afghanistan, I would probably guarantee you that all of them had witnessed or seen this and were somewhat told, we kind of don't get involved in that.
That's
because
crazy.
that's a cultural thing. We kind of don't get involved in that.
There are even UN laws around certain cultural aspects. I wouldn't know about the Afghanistan one in particular. I know in Bolivia, for example, there's a kind of a vigilante thing going on.
Okay.
Where like somebody who is accused of adultery will be made to stand in ant hills while ants bite their legs. And
Oh, really?
all sorts of weird.
I didn't know that one.
Yeah, strange, horrible punishments without any due process.
Okay.
But the UN or the laws around that are, well, this is an indigenous practice. We're not going to get involved, even though these people are, they're wearing modern clothes. They're going to shops and things like we would have. They're not living in the Stone Ages or whatever.
It's certainly not. If you ask the UN, they'd say they outlaw this. But
Okay.
I think if you ask somebody who's been ex-serving military in Afghanistan, how much do they do about it? I think they'll tell you nothing.
Yeah.
Because it is considered a cultural practice.
And this is ultimately the issue. It's something I've talked about a lot on this show. I know this particular interview is not a very political one.
No.
However, a lot of people, particularly on the left in this country, would say that all cultures are equal morally or whatever.
Yeah.
We are now importing a lot of people who are from not just that culture, but other cultures where they do things that are not compatible with the West. And my feeling, I don't know how you feel, is that by importing lots of them, we have had a lot of people from Afghanistan, and I know that Afghanistan in particular is very high in terms of the rape and sexual assault in the UK per capita.
Yeah.
This is a problem.
So I've often wondered this, and also this is also very important to understand. It's a Pashtun culture. Now, Pashtun also extends to parts of Pakistan. And also parts of Uzbekistan. So I think it's important that when we understand Bachabazi, it's actually a Pashtun cultural practice, because actually we see this generally in rural parts of Afghanistan. You wouldn't necessarily see this in Kabul, as an example.
Okay.
What's always kind of stood out to me, because look, I'm a PhD researcher. I look at data. I look at, if you show me data, the first thing I'm going to say is, well, where's this part missing? So I'll give you an example, the grooming gangs. If you show me only examples of female victims, the first thing I'm going to say is, okay, but as part of the research question or part of analysing this research, we should say, where are the boys?
Yeah.
And there should be some explanation for that. So if there's a gap in the data, we should have some explanation for that. So going back to the Bachabazi question, when I've looked at the idea of the grooming gangs, I have wondered, has anyone ever asked, were there boy victims?
Yeah.
Just because if we look at the cultural aspect of this,
Yeah.
maybe they have. I'm just saying, has anyone asked?
Yeah, you used the words with me earlier, statistically impossible, that there are no boy grooming gang victims.
It doesn't make any sense, because if we understand that people are abusing children in a gang and en masse, I mean, and how many occasions of gangs are we up to now?
Well, people have said that it's in the tens of thousands of victims.
I mean, astonishing, right? So that doesn't make statistical probable sense that it's only one gender. We also need to look at, there was a case in, and forgive me, I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly, I believe it's Kashur in Pakistan, where there was a grooming gang case. And what essentially was happening here was, it was children obviously being horrendously abused within this gang in this part of Pakistan. And it was both girl and boy children. And the images of this were being sold and traded around the world. And this is the other part of the grooming gang case that doesn't sort of connect with me or doesn't make any sense as a data point. We know that there were images created or because we know that they were also used to extort the girls into worse types of abuse. They were used to blackmail the girls. Where did those images go? And are we also supposed to believe that the gangs didn't try and sell them, knowing as we do, as we've just had the conversation of how much these images are worth on certain types of websites? So are we supposed to believe that nobody sold these or traded these? Because there's a direct correlation with a very, very famous crime in in Pakistan, where this happened and the images were specifically created to be sold. So are we assuming that just because the grooming gangs here, what they didn't sell those images and also that they didn't offend against boys? Because we know that happens in their culture. So why didn't this happen here?
I wonder, apparently some boys were identified, but I haven't heard any come forward.
I've heard this.
The other thing
in Tower Hamlets, right?
I don't know. I've just put on the internet.
I've heard this previously because I've actually looked because I was really genuinely. It really piqued my interest.
You couldn't find any examples of individuals. And the other thing is, you said in Afghanistan this developed because they couldn't get access to girls. Yeah. But I think they the grooming gangs in the UK were able to find these girls in housing estates and all sorts of places. Yeah. So that might be part of it.
That might be. That's absolutely true.
God. And then with the selling, what do you think? What are your thoughts there as a grand cover-up?
So the recent rape gang, are we allowed to say rape?
Yeah, I think at this point, because it is such a sensitive one, I'm not even going to monetize it. I'm just going to turn ads on. So just say it.
So because of the rape gang inquiry, we know that there was evidence given by one of the survivors to suggest that she was taken into a red room, and in this red room, she was abused while people were watching and they were paying money to direct her abuse. So in the same live stream pattern that we see in other parts of the world. Now, Rupert Lowe has written to the Home Secretary about this. I believe currently there's been no response. But again, that was one particular incident. I'm fairly certain that there was more of that going on in there. So I don't think we've uncovered anywhere close to the depth of depravity that was going on there.
Do you think? Because that's it. With Savile, we didn't until he died.
Yeah.
This is a different case because you'd need all the politicians who might be accused of covering this up, all the police officers who were in any way involved to all no longer be there for everything to come out.
I think that's probably true. I think if we look at the data, it seems to be just growing and growing and growing. But yet, there are, as I say, there are certain statistical anomalies in it. There's no boys in there. If these images were made, where did the images end up and for what purpose? Was money changing hands, and to who? To what country? Where did this go? And I think if we look at the current national inquiry, when is that beginning? I've lost track, frankly, at this point.
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable to suggest that the people looking into this data, they want to look at it on the surface. That's my read into this. They want to look at this on the surface. They don't actually want to ask those questions. And I think part of that is also that people who've been employed into these inquiries are not necessarily people with any clinical experience, any even research experience in this area. And if you don't have those two things, then how can you accurately analyze that data? That's what I guess I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that combined with there's just too many people who will be implicated if all of it comes out.
Yeah, I think that's probably true also. I think I don't know how much of the actual rape gang inquiry's testimony is being used or submitted to the National Inquiry. I'm not actually sure. But certainly that part of the testimony really jumped out at me.
I mean, you see how seriously they don't take these kinds of things. The fact that Peter Mandelson was brought back in by Keir Starmer. They just don't care. And that just beggars belief, because he's saying, oh, he was misinformed, whatever. We all knew about the whole Mandelson stuff. Everyone knew the Mandelson stuff. So it's the same thing with the grooming gangs. I just think they don't care that much. They just want to get votes. They just want to get on with their lives.
I think that's one way of looking at it. But is there also... I've also wondered, has the problem become so big that they actually think I don't even know where this starts and ends? So if, for example, what I'm suggesting, that these girls were, the terrible abuse of these girls was being live streamed or sold around the world, well, that uncovers a whole nother, hornet's nest for them. So is that in their interest? Is that in their political interest to go and look under, to go and turn over that rock?
They must have been selling it to sort of, all around the world, but also, Pakistan, people back there watching this stuff.
I imagine so. I mean, I think that's possibly true. But I mean, if we know that this is a global industry, they could have been selling it anywhere. I think it's not in the government's interest to turn over these rocks, because they don't know what they're going to uncover. And frankly, I think the grooming gangs has become, particularly in the current government, it's become such a rock around their neck that they clearly don't want to address it. That, I mean, the last National Inquiry, I believe lots of people were leaving the National Inquiry because they wanted to expand it to beyond the grooming gangs.
Right. That feels like a political decision to distract.
Yeah, because of course that means you want to water it down and then you want to talk about a load of other stuff.
Yeah.
So if we look at Jess Phillips, who's obviously recently resigned 2 days ago because she said the government haven't done enough about specifically online trafficking of children and self-generated material of children. Well, what have you done, Jess? Because in the recent select committee, you were asked, how are you actually, if this is your big sort of, the hill you're going to die on, that I'm going to end online abuse of children, how are you monitoring or evaluating the data of how much of this, of how many of images of these are in circulation in the UK? She couldn't answer. If you also look at, she was asked about, she had this thing about, I'm going to half violence against women and girls in, is it 2 years? Or I can't remember. Again, didn't have the data, had no idea. So what she wanted to do, I think, with the National Inquiry was to expand it to just catch everything, because she doesn't actually want the data. And also, frankly, does she know how to monitor or evaluate it? I doubt it.
I feel, the Jess Phillips thing, she's such an interesting character, because there's something about her, and this is going to piss everyone off, but I actually quite like, because she's brave. She goes out in front of like these people who want to like kill her, and she really wants to push back, and I think she wants to help. But then she's got what seems to be just an ideological total block over her, and she won't admit what the problem is.
So I can't agree with you there. I'm not a fan of Jess.
She's not brave?
I'm not a fan of Jess Phillips, and I tell you what I'm not a fan of. I genuinely have worked frontline and centre in lots of different capacities, but one of them was actually also in women's refuges in my earlier training. Now, Jess Phillips has ridden a ticket for a long time that she has been some frontline domestic refuge worker. Have you ever looked at her CV?
No.
She worked in business development. So, I mean, frankly, she worked in an office, and then sometimes she claims I manage refuges. In what way? In business development. Then she also claims she was a victims champion in Birmingham. Tell me what actual case she's ever done. Tell me what she's actually effectively done. What I don't like about her, and I'm sure she's a well-meaning woman, but she just grandstands. I feel everything's just polemic with her.
Do you think she's bamboozled me?
Look, I don't think she is necessarily a bad person. I think she probably does have good intentions, but I certainly think what she really wanted to be was known as some kind of champion of something. But she doesn't have the background that she claims she has. And I think that, given the seniority of the jobs she had, is very dangerous, because as we've just seen, if you don't know this data inside out, let's go back to the grooming gangs. If you have no clinical experience, you have no social work experience, you have no legal experience, you don't understand that data. You cannot ask the questions of the data that need to be asked. because, and it's all very well standing up and saying, oh, you know, I'm anti-misogyny and I want to end violence against women and girls. That's great, but you shouldn't have that job because you don't have any frontline experience or qualifications to have that job.
But isn't that all politicians? All politicians, they sort of don't have that experience. They move around from job to job within politics, and then they're supposed to have people working for them who do have the experience.
I think that's probably true. I was smiling because I've got a thing where I love to know, it's the psychologist in me. I love to understand what the sort of kernel is of the person, like what the kind of motivation is of them underneath. And I became really interested in Zach Polanski recently. And so I ended up listening to a podcast he had done with The Rest is Politics.
Okay, yeah.
And he mentioned on there that the reason he really wanted to get into politics was when he was a drama student, he was doing...
breast enlargement.
No.
No.
Now, this is the red herring about him. He was doing something called Theatre of the Oppressed. Now, what this is drama students, and it came originally from a Brazilian guy who created community theatre in impoverished communities. Now, Zach Polanski went on a long diatribe on this podcast about how this has inspired him. And, you know, now he needs to tell the narratives of these people, da-da-da-da-da. And I thought, I've got you now. You're one of those drama students that just really wants to go. You're the absolute classic champagne socialist. You're a drama student that wants to come and tell people you're going to cure the world with your art.
Yeah.
And on the same podcast, he said, and then I did a debate against Keir Starmer, and he got booed and I got cheered. And I thought, and that's what you want, Zach.
Yeah.
You want to stand on a stage and everybody cheer you.
And that's what most politicians
you're a failed actor, Zach.
Yeah.
This is nothing about you being a breast whisperer. This is about you being a failed actor, Zach. So when we look at someone who doesn't have the CV, I mean, Zach Polanski sure as hell doesn't have the CV to be running any type of political party.
I think those two things, I know you say it's a red herring, but I think they're aligned really, because both of those are examples of, you know, grandstanding and hoping to get applause. Right. You know, look at how I can perform. I can perform so well, I can change somebody's body. That's how good I am.
I'm going to hypnotize you.
Yeah, I'm so good at manipulating people.
I'm going to hypnotize you. Yeah. But I mean, I agree with you that we should, in an ideal world, have politicians who, you know what, they don't always have to have frontline experience in what they're doing, but they should have advisors around them that know what they're doing. I couldn't tell you who Jess Phillips's advisors were.
No, they're ideologues, though. That's the problem. All the people in the civil service, they're just total ideologues. And they're never going to admit that the problem, particularly in her seat in and around Birmingham, you know, the problem there is Islamic grooming gangs. Doesn't mean there aren't also white gangs and white whatever, but that's a problem. She won't name that problem, and her civil service will not name that problem because it's not a vote winner.
So I worked for a long time with trauma recovery programs with refugees. And as part of that, I did quite a lot of work with human rights lawyers because I used to do a lot of medico-legal reports. And I think for anyone who's watching or listening who's ever worked with human rights lawyers, this will really connect with them, that there is no ideologue more sort of rooted in their ways, but almost dangerous in a way than a human rights lawyer. Now, what I mean by that is they certainly go into it in the same way Jess Phillips has, with the greatest of intentions, the most noble of intentions. But ultimately, that saviour complex and that because I'm left-wing and liberal, I must be righteous, I think just really diverts any other alternative view that they ever have. So I've had lots of conversations with human rights lawyers, arguments even, where they'll say to me, this person's been accused of this crime or what have you, but there must be something else in their background that we can point to that suggests that, you know, there must be some sort of trauma.
Fault. Yeah.
Alison, we must be able to find some sort of trauma. And I'm like, we're not going to do that again, because as you know my position, I'm not going to defend the fact that they've abused somebody because they're claiming that there was past trauma and that those two things are exclusive. But I think when we look at human rights lawyers and ideologues in general, what we're really looking at is somebody that thinks, because I'm the champion of what is good and right, then everything I say must be right. And I think frankly, that's probably the problem with the current Prime Minister. I think, again, if we're looking at Zach Polanski as an actor, we cannot forget Keir Starmer as a human rights lawyer. And that's where he comes from, right? Everything he does is because what I'm doing is liberal and it's just, and I don't think he actually sees any other view other than his own.
We had someone on here, Clyde Stafford Smith, who's like the ultimate example of that. I wish I could get you in a room with him.
I did see him. I did see that. I did actually see.
I almost was left speechless
I did see that.
at times with some of the insanity he was coming out with. But it was just the human rights stuff. It was just babble. It was just ideological speech.
Honestly, I've got to tell you, it almost gave me PTSD myself, because I was thinking, I remember this so much. I remember working so much with this type of character that it's nothing beyond your view of, and again, these are beautiful worldviews of everybody deserves a fair chance. We should extend human kindness to everybody. These are beautiful worldviews. So is communism, but it doesn't necessarily,
it's a utopia, isn't it?
Exactly. But that just, it clouds their views so much that actually they can't see anything beyond that. And I also think, particularly in his case, and I don't know if this was your feeling as well.
Clyde.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or Clive. Clive.
He's come from, I presume, a very, very academic background.
Yeah.
Now, very, very academic people often, in my experience anyway, want to underplay the lived experience of another person. So if they're listening to somebody saying, in my street or in my town, this is what I'm seeing, the first thing they'll say is, no, that can't be right. Oh, you can't be thinking this about the migrants. That's not genuinely true. That's not, because in their eyes, oh, but that's just your one working class lived experience. I'm above that. I see the world from a much bigger lens. And actually my lens is the righteous one. That's my experience of seeing those people. So I think when I remember watching that interview, I think he was suggesting that he had defended somebody who had murdered a child.
Yeah.
And he wanted to tell a very long story about the abuse that man had suffered, not recognizing that those two things are not necessarily combined. They're exclusive. And then I think he told a story of how he convinced the mother of the child to speak to this person, and I was just horrified. Yeah,
the empathy, loads of empathy until there's empathy for actual victims.
Yeah,
then their empathy runs out, it appears.
And this is where I feel, if we jump back to the grooming gangs, people were saying, "This is my experience. This is what happened. This is what I saw. This is what I lived through." But there's lots of people saying, "Oh, but that can't be true because that doesn't really fit with my liberal worldview." So. Yeah. That's okay, fine. That's your view and that's your lived experience. But we know it's not all, or we know it's not, because I guess what I see with that type of view is a very upper middle class academic silencing of someone who's from a less academic or maybe working class background, and the silencing of their real lived experience.
It's elitism.
It's absolutely elitism, because it's the belief of, because I haven't lived through this and my town doesn't look like this and this doesn't happen to me. And the books that I read, this doesn't happen in, so there's no way this happens.
Yeah, and that's what happened with the grooming gangs for decades until finally it was uncovered. Dr. Alison McClymont, I've got some questions for you on Substack. People have asked some questions. They've asked loads of questions for you. I'm going to get onto that. The link will be below. We'll put links to your work as well. And people, hit that like button and keep watching this channel.